Schönen guten Tag, liebe Seherinnen und Hörer des YouTube-Kanals von International. Hier spricht wieder Fritz Edlinger. Das ist ein ganz kurzes Einleitungsvideo zu einem anschließenden längeren Gespräch, das unser in Japan tätiger Schweizer Kollege und Freund Pascal Lotaz geführt hat mit Agnes Hellström. Agnes Hellström ist eine, wie der Name doch erahnen lässt, ist eine Schwedin. Sie ist eine wesentliche Exponentin und Aktivistin der schwedischen Friedensbewegung, die gerade in den letzten Monaten und Jahren massiv unter Druck gekommen ist, auch in Schweden. Warum wir dieses Video auch hier im deutschsprachigen Kanal präsentieren, hat im Wesentlichen zwei Gründe, die auch etwas mit der Geschichte zu tun haben. Schweden war über Jahrzehnte hindurch eines der Flaggschiffe der europäischen Neutralitäts- und Friedensbewegung, wie zum Beispiel auch mein Heimatland Österreich. Und so wie der legendäre österreichische Politiker Bruno Kreisky im Grab rotieren würde, wenn er das alles miterleben müsste, was seine Nachfolger an der österreichischen Bundesregierung alles von sich geben und tun, würde auch Olof Palme im Grab rotieren, wenn er sehen müsste, was aus seinem neutralen, friedlichen und friedenskämpferischen Schweden geworden ist, nämlich ein NATO-Mitglied, das auch in den aktuellen Fragen des Ukraine-Krieges, auch wiederum jetzt in der Israel- und Palästina-Frage in Wirklichkeit sich vom Mainstream Europas, vom US-amerikanischen NATO-Mainstream kaum mehr unterscheidet. Agnes Hellström schildert in diesem Gespräch ihre eigenen Erfahrungen, sich in Schweden, im Schweden der 2020er Jahre für traditionelle schwedische Werte eingesetzt zu haben. Es ist ihr leider nicht gut gegangen, weil sie musste miterleben, auch wie Schweden so schnell, wie es nur irgendwie möglich war, zur NATO gekommen ist. In diesem Sinn ist das ein Beitrag zu einer europäischen Diskussion über europäische Werte in dem Sinn, wie sie heute missverstanden und wie sie seinerzeit in meiner Generation von anderen Leuten richtig verstanden worden sind, nämlich Europa hat eigene Interessen, hat eigene politische und Sicherheitsinteressen und die sollten nicht vergessen werden. In dem Sinn, schaut euch das nächste Video an und es würde mich freuen, den einen oder anderen Kommentar zu sehen. Bis zum nächsten Mal.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking to Agnes Hellström, who is a Swedish writer and peace activist. She served between 2016 and 2022 as the chairperson of the Swedish Peace and Arbitration Society, the world's oldest peace organization, founded in 1883. In that position, she spoke out forcefully against sending weapons to Ukraine when the war broke out last year, remaining firmly pacifist. This position earned her a lot, and I mean a lot, of criticism in Swedish media. To digest all of these experiences and reflect on the state of the peace movement, Agnes wrote a book with the provocative title Fredsfittan, or Peace Pussy, in English. The book is available at the moment only in Swedish, but you'll find a short abstract written by Agnes herself on our homepage, neutrality.studies.com. And of course, we'll discuss the book and her experiences right now. Agnes, thank you so much for coming online.
Thank you for inviting me.
Agnes, you obviously had a lot on your plate. You write in the abstract that you wrote for neutralitystudies.com that that in these months after the warfare in Ukraine became exponentially worse from what it was before in 2022, that it was the start of the toughest sprint of your life, both personally and professionally. So trying to nuance and broaden the perspectives on security issues, you were accused of being a traitor who ran Putin's errands, right? With a husband from Ukraine and a Ukrainian refugee family moving in, however, the madness of this war really kept you awake at night. Could you expand on that and tell us what this was like for you personally?
Yeah, as you said, it was a really intense period, and I had been the chair of SPAS, as we call our organization, for almost 6 years. So it was supposed to be my last 5 months on the job, and I was gonna, try to prepare for the next person to continue my work. But instead, the invasion happened, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and as my organizations have always been anti-militaristic and also against the Swedish arms trade. So when the decision in the Swedish parliament was going to be made about sending arms, SPAS was saying no to that, or suggesting no, as instead for Sweden to take another part of the war, trying to be a strong voice for diplomacy and for not an escalation to happen. But the decision was made, and everyone more or less in the whole society, or at least in the political sphere, was for it. So we were more or less the only voice trying to nuance it, like saying there are international laws saying we should never forget that arms can worsen the situation, and we shouldn't make that happen. We should do our best to make sure that these arms don't make the situation worse for the Ukrainians. And that created a lot of hatred, I would say, just being trying to nuance the debate. And very short after that, or more or less at the same time, really hard pressure started on Sweden applying for a NATO membership. And as SPAS was against this too, I was at the end more or less the only voice argumenting for doing it more slowly, not forgetting about the analysis, looking into what authoritarian countries, as for example Turkey, could do, or also being aligned with these kind of countries, how that would affect Sweden. And as we all see now, Sweden has still not joined NATO because of Erdogan and Turkey's pressure on Sweden. But at the same time, then this spring, my partner, he was born and raised in Ukraine and moved to Sweden when he was 12. And through a friend of his, a family needed help and moved into our basement, or our house 10 days into the war. So it was also a lot it was so much sadness and frustration, and also having the work I had, it was so sad to see that once again the efforts had failed to avoid a war, because we all know how incredibly difficult it is to make it stop, and how many people being affected by it. So, and also the whole family, the Ukrainian family, reached Sweden, and as we all know, the men weren't allowed to leave Ukraine. Men between 18 and 60 were supposed to stay in the country, and therefore it was also an important part of my job for me to support everyone who didn't want to be part of a war. Because in Sweden, until the early 1900s, men in Sweden got jail time for not wanting to be part of the military. So for me, it was like a part of that too, to just stand up for human rights and for all the things that no one talked about during this period that is so important always, like human rights, and never stop, like preparing for peace, and also to prevent that similar situations should happen again, because it always does, it seems, and we always suffer from the wars that that are taking place all over the world, I would say.
Yeah, wars that are made. I think another colleague of mine always reminds us that wars don't just happen; wars are made, and wars are made by escalatory relationships between different parties. And often you have the war parties who collaborate, and the peace parties in both states that collaborate, and more often than not, it's the war parties that succeed. But so for you, who was then heading an organization that was, well, what was it, 125, 130 years old by the time you took the helm, and had survived both the First and the Second World War, and had stood strong in this pacifist belief that no, arms make things worse, which they always do. It's not like 50 years later, we always look back and say, like, yeah, it's very clear why this happened, because the escalatory spiral, once you can think about it calmly. But during the heat of the day, it always seems that our emotions carry us away. Was this knowledge of working for an old organization helping you to actually to filter through all of this war propaganda that then started engulfing us? Or was it, on the contrary, even more difficult? Did you have members who said, like, we have to go, we have to send weapons? What happened inside the organization?
No, actually, inside the organization, the members were really supportive. There were members from like 30 years ago that weren't part of the organization anymore. They had a different opinion, but they, like, the organization within had a really strong support, and the history is really important. It was both for me important, but for the members, I think. And I also felt that when I wrote the book about it, that I used the examples from the past, both during the time to remind me what I'm striving for, and the tough periods that they went through. For example, we had a president or a chairperson during the 50s and the 60s in Sweden. He was an author like me, and he was against nuclear weapons on Swedish ground. And he was accused of being a traitor, running whoever's errands, the communist errands, I think it was by then. But he didn't give up, and the plans for getting nuclear weapons in Sweden, it was they spoiled it. They like changed their minds. We never had nuclear weapons. So examples like that I both use in my book, but also I used in my private life, that because he has written a book that's called like The Fight for Peace, that was released in the 70s, that is about one example is the Second World War, when he describes a similar situation about how everyone gets like the emotions are taking over, and everyone changes their mind and think the same thing, and we should only like bomb. And the SPAS organization was the only one saying by then not to send arms to Finland, which was in the last time Sweden decided to support one part in an armed conflict with arms.
In 1940.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it was 39-40, and Sweden did it for a quite short period of time, and decided to stop it like in the middle of it, which is also a problem. I think that like the arms support, it tends to stop when it's in its most difficult period. But so for me, it was Berta von Suttner also, who wrote a novel about I don't know the title in English, but like Put Down the Arms. That was like a worldwide success, and she was an important person in the international peace movement that actually made like international law and UN and all that happen in the long run. So for me, I went to boarding school, and my family is from like the upper class of Sweden. So I was raised among these people who are like really have strong voices and strong opinions. But I learned that it doesn't matter. Their opinion is just the same has the same value as mine, and their knowledge isn't bigger just because they scream it. So therefore, for me, it was when everyone screamed in my face that I was wrong and that SPAS should change their mind and that we were traitors, I just felt something is fishy when people are screaming in your face. It's probably because you're onto something. So that's been my like core thought the whole period, that the angrier people get at me for being just this woman-only voice, it shouldn't be a threat if it's not really onto something. So for me, it was really, really tough, and I was so tired when I resigned, or when my period was over. But I'm proud that I did it, that I didn't give up in a way.
Congratulations to that, because this takes a lot of courage. You're totally right. Whenever people demand of us that we apologize for not wanting to go to war or not have war, we know that something is seriously wrong. It's like when people start arguing, this time maybe genocide is necessary, or this time maybe we need to use bombs. Whenever these arguments happen, then it's really important to go back to principles, which you did. So did somebody actually call you a peace pussy? Did that happen? And in what context?
No, actually, it was. I was interviewed in a TV show in the Swedish one, a politics one, and they asked me what's the opposite. In Sweden, there's a word for a person who's really into arms. It's called like a war dick, if you translate it. So they asked me, what is the opposite of war dick? And then I said, like, yeah, if you translate it correctly and just straight, it's peace pussy. So when they asked me that, I knew that if I say it, it will be used, and I will probably be called that. So therefore, I'm going to claim it. So I claimed it. And therefore, the title of the book is, for me, it's a really positive word. Because if the world was full of peace pussies, we would have much less war. So it's, I wanted to create that like confusion, that the person who looks at it is like, oh my God, was she called this? That's so bad. And then like, no, she is a peace pussy, and she's calling herself that.
That's what makes you an activist, because you think politically and not just analytically and so on. You think like how to use this. I keep, I'm gay, and I keep thinking how to use that. And I whenever possible, I would like to tell people that the only moment when I approve of guys shooting at other guys is when they're in bed and nothing else. But that sounds even worse. But I mean, seriously, you have a wonderful point there, that a lot of this rhetoric still comes from men, although we have seen in this war also how women can play an extremely destructive role, and they behave exactly like these men that you described, and how this spiral is being turned ever hotter with the role Ursula von der Leyen is playing, and some of these neocons in the United States. Now let's shift maybe to that a bit. Your husband or your partner being from Ukraine, how were you able to digest what was happening inside his country and between Russia and Ukraine? And you must have known all of the complicated history, right? That this conflict feeds on. What was your conclusion of what would have been the best thing to do?
Well, I think it's a very hard question. I think it's both me and my partner, husband, whatever. I call him different things, but we're actually married, so I should call him husband. We're very like engaged in peace issues, but also in like masculinity norms. He has been chair of a Swedish organization that's part of like Men Engage, is the like international network of it. But like we could all see that how only in Sweden, like before the war broke out, the rhetorics was really like alarmistic, and like war is coming, when is war coming, like how you talk about the conflict, that the people talking, for example, the intents that Macron did, for example, to talk to Putin was a bit like ridiculed, like he's trying to talk to someone, that's not being a real man, you should just threaten him with violence, is the only thing he listens to. That rhetoric, it was really strong in Sweden, it was really strong like within the NATO member countries, and the whole West world was talking like that. And for me, it's just like the worst way to treat an escalation, that it's a really humiliated guy in Russia feeling that I have to act. That's what most people would do when they get pushed like that. But I'm the book and my story is it's very much focused on like the Swedish what happened in Sweden and what Sweden could have done and didn't do, in my opinion. So like what I always think that we should have invested so much more in the non-military like tools. If we did that a long time ago, when the Soviet Union was what's it called?
Collapsed.
Evolved? No, collapsed. Yeah. Then we could have had a different world. So it's like that's what Spaz's strength is, that we know what we need to do to prevent conflicts to get violent, but we never get those investments. Instead, in Sweden, the recent years has been like, yeah, let's push even more into the military. Now we have to strengthen our borders, and then we like well, the money to invest in the people to make them feel safe, like human security, is being decreased and decreased. And for me, it's like that's the preventive work we have to do all the time. And when a war breaks out like now, then we just skip all that and we move like decades back in time with equality, with everything. So the solution, we never really, before the war started, we talked a lot like this. They should really try to de-escalate and like in some way just make people chill, like Putin chill. So this doesn't have to happen. They should have all the meetings that's possible. They should not escalate. But when it happened, it was more like the worry of, yeah, my partner's best friend, he was in Kiev and we didn't get hold of him. We still haven't gotten hold of him. So most probably he's dead. But that was like our focus the first weeks and even months, was being in touch with the people we knew in Ukraine and trying to support them the ways we could, either by like helping them coming to Sweden or just giving them information they needed or wherever. So that was our main priority at that moment.
How would you have wished that this ended once it started? Okay, like we know that the war broke out and this war was preventable. There was nothing inevitable about it. This could have been prevented also by having these talks that you just talked about. We know that the Russians were open to that. We know that the Russians actually wanted to push negotiations, even if they wanted to push it with like having a military in their back, which, well, okay, seems unfair, but fine. Once the war started, what was your wishing that the international community did in order to bring an end to this slaughtering? And by now it's a meat grinder. It's a World War I type kind of trench warfare meat grinder where both sides try to kill as many of the other as they can. And this is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous that this can happen in 2023. But the war was slightly different when it started, when you were in office in the peace organization. What was your vision for how this should go down?
Well, actually, the first night they were talking a lot about that the Russian soldiers didn't even know that they were going to war, that they were in some kind of well, what's it called, practice. And then my thought was, what if we could just support them to say fuck this shit? That would end this war instantly. And at that time it was like, for me, I never got to the point having any suggestions how to end this war, because for me this is too massive for me to have a suggestion more than just like we should try to get end of the violence. Just we have to get the conversation going so the violence stops. That's like the first step, just so the civilians wouldn't get hurt, that we just make the violence stop. But that didn't happen. And then supporting everyone who didn't want to use arms on both sides, of course, but mostly the Russians. Like if we would make all the Russian soldiers just say, we don't do this, we don't want this, we just leave it, then we will have no war. But in Sweden, it's been such a, I feel I'm so affected by it, because in Sweden we don't have a nuanced discussion about this. It's really, really black and white. It's if you even talk about the diplomatic tools, and that we can never stop talking to Putin, even though he's a dictator or whatever, then you get accused of being on Putin's side. So for me, I feel now that I'm like, I've been a bit damaged by that in a really sad way, that I'm really careful in what I say, and I want to know a lot before I talk about things. And my expertise is like not at all how to make this war end, unfortunately. I wish I could say, if we did this, this could like be the end of it, and we could get a conversation and a peace deal and the freedom of the Ukrainian people and a strong democracy. But it's on the other hand, I see like how it can get worse and worse the longer the war goes on. And even if we get peace, what will happen to democracy in Ukraine? And the people had been hurt. I heard like there were 15,000 having their limbs amputated. And like all the men who never come back, and all the violence who comes home after the war back to families, all that I see. So I have no solutions. I have mostly fears, actually, at the moment. I've been really, really sad, and the recent weeks also with the situation in Israel and Palestine. I just feel like the violence must stop. I can't stand this anymore. It's how can we let this happen?
Same here.
So,
Same here. Maybe a last question for this segment. How do you deal with it? So you personally, how do you deal with also now with Israel Palestine? I also emotionally, I can't bear seeing these pictures, and also knowing that this conflict is 75 years old and it's getting worse and worse, and the Palestinians kill Israelis and the Israelis kill 100 times more Palestinians, just as a matter of, as policy. And this violence feeds on each other, on utter hatred. And somehow these sides are not able to break through it, sometimes out of policy, sometimes out of group dynamics. Do you have a way to deal with it internally for you?
Well, I lost my father when I was 5. He died when we lived in Mozambique, really suddenly. And that was... at the same time, this was my biggest crisis and grief I carry with me since. It also has given me hope is really close. Hope and happiness, I carry it closely, because I know that I can lose everything anytime. So therefore, I'm very good at focusing on the small things in life that gives me happiness, like having a home and that I can fight for things I believe in, that I got my book released and I can talk about it, and I'm not afraid. Maybe I should be afraid, I don't know, but I'm not afraid. So I've tried to just for me, peace is a verb that you do all the time. The life you lead and the way you treat people. So I try to make peace in my little life, and that's all I can do at the moment, because it's when I think about the bigger picture, I've been so sad the last weeks. I can't really. I have trouble sleeping again because of it, because it's like it never ends. And I started as a joke, but also like in a way, and as a big real idea, that just, okay, we're going to create this village now, and we're going to have strict rules here: no arms, no violence. Everyone who wants to join this this village have to sign that we are going to do this like non-violent communication, and we're going to try building a society the way we want it. And the more and more people want to join, and in the end it's going to be the whole society. But I'm not going to start that village this week, but it's like in my mind that I have to live the way I think the world should be. So that's my way to deal with it.
A tabula rasa moment would be fantastic, when we can start anew. Let me maybe use this also to go to the second part of this talk. I'm still talking to Agnes Hellström, everybody, the Swedish peace activist. And in the second part, we want to discuss the politics of Sweden. So we've just said how sad it is that as individuals there's very little we can do except for like cry and be sad and also live peace in our individual lives. Now a second part, of course, is what do these lateral states do? You know, Sweden, Switzerland, we are kind of at the margin, but we are incorporated into the system, right? Also into the greater Western system and the system of violence and escalation with Russia, escalation with other outside forces. And then we've inside our countries, we have some people who oppose that, like you, and we have some people who cheer that on, especially on the political level. Now, how is it that Sweden went from 200 years of neutrality, although I must say the Swedish neutrality was always neutrality because of a lack of other options for 200 years. And I'm not being sarcastic here. Like, you know, this is the history of Swedish neutrality is the lack of not having something else. Sweden always wanted to build something else. Before the Second World War, a Nordic defense organization. After the Second World War again, but it didn't happen. So you do what makes most sense, which is do it yourself, but don't make anyone your enemy, right? I mean, the reason why Sweden didn't develop the nuclear bomb is because suddenly the military establishment realized that if we make this bomb, that we are going to be the target by the Soviet Union. We're going to be the first ones to be taken out, and we have no friends. So having a bomb actually makes things worse. I'll have a book coming out about this pretty soon.
Oh, wow.
But so let's take this political issue now. How come that Sweden did this U-turn? And you describe it as a U-turn in your book.
Yeah. In Sweden, it has been for several years now that 4 parties in the parliament are for a NATO membership, and 4 are against. But the majority is in the 4 that are against, and it's also the government's party, like the
that
Social Democrats.
4 joining the NATO.
Yeah, 4 joining the NATO, but the majority has been the ones against joining the NATO. So now I'm in the beginning of 2022. So when January started in 2022, were 4 parties for NATO and 4 parties against NATO. But I think it was like 60-40 in the percentage of representation. So it had been a non-issue. It was like the opposition knew that we can't really. The Swedes were against. I think it was like 36% who were for NATO membership, which had been increasing, but it was still like too low. And Finland had also really low, like 26% before the war started, joining NATO. And Sweden listened to Finland. It was not on the agenda to join if Finland didn't join at the moment. But then in Sweden, the interesting part that I had almost forgotten when I started writing my book was that in January it was a lot of tension on the border to Ukraine, but in Sweden it was being talked about in the media like it was Sweden that was being threatened. And the first thing that would happen was that drones were being seen in different parts of Sweden, and the experts said, "Oh, most probably they are Russian drones, and they are being watched in really bad places like what's it called, nuclear plants? No, what's it called with the energy
nuclear
system?
Power plants, yeah. So
nuclear
you have sightings.
Plants.
You had sightings of unidentified drones near critical infrastructure.
Yes, exactly. Really good summarized. So it was up to 200 observations that were being reported to the police, and it was really like fear in by the Swedes, among the Swedes, what's going on and why are the Russians attacking us like this? What could happen next? And then they started sending military to Gotland, our island. It's the really strategic NATO island, you could call it. And there were being reports from there that the tensions are increasing, and they connected it to the island, but the island had nothing to do with the tensions in Ukraine. It had nothing to do with each other. And also, actually, our armed forces went out and said that the media is losing its mind. They are reporting as a war is coming to Sweden, but that is not the issue. There is no risk of a war in Sweden. So it was a strange situation. But then when the invasion happened, the opposition got this, like, they had the fear that had been building up in Sweden, and with the war starting, people couldn't separate the threat against Sweden and Ukraine. So they thought that now we have to act, and what is the answer? NATO is the answer. So the media started like pulling this ball, I would say, the NATO ball that the opposition started rolling. And they said, like, Finland is thinking about it, Sweden has to do it. This is for our citizens, like safeties for them. The citizens were doubtful. There was like a 40% up for a long time that supported the NATO membership. So we weren't that convinced. But the first big thing that happened was that the Swedish Democrats, the like right-wing party, they changed their mind. They said that if Finland joins, we will support a NATO membership, and then they could, with the opposition, say, if we win the elections in September, we will apply. So then the Social Democrats felt so threatened by this. I think the election coming up, the NATO issue being like, they've been really pressured by it. So they decided to not make it an election issue. So that's why from March, first it was November 21 when our defense minister said that I will never, ever during my being in this role be part of Sweden joining NATO. Until March, when the Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson said it's not now. Now is not the time joining NATO. Until May, 2 months later, when they applied. So it's such a short period of time. It was like in total 80 days from when the war started and the application was sent in. So yeah, it was because of like fear and threats from the opposition, I would say.
And both of these politicians were still in office the time they sent the application. It's like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That's why a never from a politician's mouth always means not now, but only when I change my mind.
Yeah, I know. And for him, it was he was the last one to like officially say that he had changed his mind, because it was such a bad thing to have said. I can promise you, I will never. Like, it was really strong. Like, he promised his members, and also the Social Democrats members, they were so offended and saddened by this, because the process that the Social Democrats then started to look into if the members supported a NATO membership, it was done in like 2 weeks. It was done in a Zoom meeting. It was no conversation. It was only a monologue being done by the people in power. So it was like the analysis being made was also really quick, and they didn't even look into the risks with Turkey, for example. So it was everything was done, in weeks. And that was, for me, was like, in the beginning I was trying to talk about the risks with why Sweden should be military non-aligned, in my opinion. And at the end I was only like, we should not do it right now. We should wait, because we have to know the risks. We have to know what we're making a decision about. And then I was still accused of being a lunatic. So
this is
and
really
look now.
Yeah, but this is really interesting. And, I keep saying in my discussions about neutrality is that if you have a neutrality policy in place, a permanent neutrality policy, it acts like an emergency brake. It prevents you from joining one side of a war at a time when everything is in the fog, right? And this is exactly what happened to Sweden. The emergency brake broke, and then there you go and throw yourself into the fray. Two things. First one, this fear mongering that happened. Did anything clear up later on what that was about? Because I have this question. You just answered an important question to me. People who say that Sweden is joining NATO because Russia is so threatening, so scary, that disregards or that makes the argument that Sweden is now more scared of Russia than it was during the Cold War of the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union was less of a threat because Sweden didn't join, right? Than Russia is now. And this is paradoxical. But this fear component that you're mentioning could explain that. So that's the first thing. And then the second one, please, your thoughts on this one. Did anything clear up about the scaremongering?
Yeah, I think that is. I followed the argumentation when when I wrote the book, how it changed during the debate, and the ones who wanted a NATO membership in the beginning of it, like in February, March, they said Russia is the biggest threat right now, so we have to join NATO, otherwise we're fucked. And then after maybe a month, they said Russia is now occupied being at war in Ukraine, so the threat against Sweden is less right now, but we don't know in the future, so therefore we have to join right now because now there's an opening. So it was like from that Russia was a big threat, and then they realized that it isn't. We can't really argue that Russia is at the point of attacking Sweden, so we have to change the argument. So we create the window argument instead, that now is the window to join. So I think it was the big problem was that the experts were always like either from what's it called, organizations like lobby organizations for NATO, who had experts talking about security issues. Of course they wanted to join NATO, and then there were military experts who of course they wanted to join NATO. So therefore it was the media was being blindsided by this. I think it's a really, I think the security issues is really hard to report about because it's so much lobbying in it, and it's so much strong words and so much fear and so much feelings in it, that as a journalist, if you aren't prepared for it, you get what's it called? Like they fool
Overwhelmed.
you. Yeah, you get overwhelmed, and you also choose experts that aren't experts because it's the only thing you see. You look, okay, oh, and there's the peace organization, and that expert over there says that the peace organization, you should never listen to them. So let's not call them, because then they might call me a Putin hugger.
So they didn't call you, or were you interviewed? Were you in that process at all?
Yeah. I was called, but actually in the book I have this example that started a little bit of a debate in Sweden last week, because I was invited to a TV show in January to be in a debate against a person who wanted to join NATO. And then that person had said to the journalist that I will not join if Agnes is by my side, because she's not worth arguing against, because her thoughts aren't worth listening to, more or less. And then the editor of the show choose to follow his wish. So they told me, unfortunately, Agnes, you can't join because the guest didn't think that was a good idea. And as a journalist, I was like, what the fuck was that? That is so not journalistically correct. So, but at the time, it was so much happening. So I was just really angry about this, told my husband, who's also a journalist, what is this? They can't do it. This is not journalism. So I put it in my book. And then that guy who had declined, like, well, he created that sense that I wasn't worth listening to. He tried to explain why he had said it, but I mean, he has a lot of power, and he's one of the people that is being listened to. So of course, if he says you shouldn't listen to the peace movement, well, the journalists don't invite the peace movement. So I was invited, but I was invited as a peace activist. I was not invited as an expert. So they had the alibi was the peace activist who could say her feelings, and then we had the expert who could tell us like rationally what we should do.
It is such a dirty trick. This whole expert thing is such a dirty trick, and we see again how the media is shaping reality, right? More than reporting on it. I mean, it probably always has been, but right now it's explicitly very, very dangerous that this happens, that the media basically keeps shaping public opinion. And I do think that the people you talked about who were talking about a window of opportunity, I think they were correct. But they were correct in the sense that it's a window of opportunity of public opinion, not of threat or anything.
Yes.
And that's my second question. Do you think that Austria and Switzerland, we have our neutralities in our constitution. So if you want to change that, if you want to join NATO, you need a mandatory public referendum for this to happen, at least in Switzerland. Austria, well, I mean, yeah, difficult to imagine, but you would need a public referendum. In Sweden, this was purely a parliamentary decision that could then be executed by the government. Do you think that had there been a referendum and actually, a couple of months' time to discuss it and debate it honestly, do you think there would have been a majority that would have said yes or not?
Well, it's a good question. I know by following the opinion back like in 2014, 2015, the support increased in Sweden because of fear, because the invasion of Crimea. But then it was decreased again. And this, of course, happened here again. They increased, but then as the decision was being made so fast, and the media reporting was more or less telling you that if you don't want to join NATO, you are a traitor. Not in words, but I mean, many people felt afraid to speaking their minds. And also, both politicians and media was talking about that. Oh, we couldn't have a referendum because it would be affected by Russia would try to like affect it. And then a few of us was like, but democracy works like that we have to trust the system. And if we just don't let the people speak their mind, then we don't have democracy anymore. Should we not have elections because of Russia? That's such a weird argument. So we was like, if we would have had time, now we had time. I mean, now we can see that because the only risk that the analysis that was made saw was the time between Sweden applied and Sweden was let into NATO. That was the biggest risk, that period of time that we're now been in for more than a year. So with that, like knowing that, we could have had the referendum. We could have had the broader, deeper debate about it. We could have known for sure what the people thought. And if we would have had it in a fair way, without people pointing at you like, you love Putin because you are against NATO, then I'm quite sure that would have, I'm not sure of anything, but at least I would have accepted it. If we had the referendum and the people said, yes, we want NATO, I would be okay with it. But as it was done, it was like us being against it or trying to like see risks with it. We're being pushed down, and after the decision, when same people tried to protest against Erdogan, for example, they were being called the security threats. So the policy of Sweden is changing also. That what is our democratic voice worth? Yeah, if we say the right things, we can say it right now. But I experience that we are putting our democracy at risk here, and I see things happening like weekly that makes me actually really afraid of where we are going as a country. I just wish we had it as you did in our constitution, because that would have been so great.
Yeah, it has always been a policy and never a principle for Sweden. But the only thing that makes me bear this situation a little bit is like being able to see how ridiculous the situations sometimes are and how ironies are created constantly. The big irony for Sweden right now is that, again, as for the last 200 years, it's not part of an alliance because there's no option, right? The Turks say no, and the other irony is that the Sweden prides itself of being this humanitarian actor and so on and so forth, and now has to give in to the anti-democratic, like anti-humanistic demands of Turkey, and tries to do so. The government officially says, we are trying to extradite these bastards to you, but our judicial system wouldn't let us, so let us try to change the judicial system a little bit so we can conform to you, which is a nightmare. It's a nightmare. Yes. And you do, and this is all happening in the name of democracy, which you then cannot have, because if you did, you would have external influences. And just let me share this for a second. Since 3 days ago, the Swiss are really scared because we're going to have parliamentary election next weekend. And there's now news articles that Putin is trying to influence Swiss parliamentary elections, as if though anyone in the world gave a damn about Switzerland's parliamentary election. I mean, Putin being the last one in the world about Switzerland. And this narrative, this idea of this evildoer who's trying to influence innocent democracies, this narrative is so strong right now that it actually then influences internal movements of going towards more authoritarian styles of government. So where is this going for Sweden? Do you?
But I have a funny example about this referendum and democracy and like influence in my book about Switzerland and Sweden. Because when Sweden wanted to sell the fighting jet JAS Gripen to Switzerland, it was going to be a referendum about it. Yes. And then the arms company Saab tried to sponsor the yes side of Switzerland with a few million Swedish kronor, and they had to give it back because it was against the laws of how the influence which parts could which actors could influence the elections, and it was really not correctly done. So Saab was then had to take back their money, and there were people in the Swedish government who were really trying to affect this referendum for the Swedish part, then in a good way to make the citizens say yes. And then a few years later they talk about Russia trying to affect the Swedish referendum, but then either we just learn that there are good mechanisms that can make us have elections, as the case of Switzerland when Sweden tried to affect, or we can just realize that there are always sides trying to affect elections, but we can't blame it all on Russia all the time, because maybe the risk is bigger that it's Sweden to try to affect the Swiss elections than the other way around. So I think that's an interesting perspective as well, with all this really high voices
meddling
about what to be afraid of, and what is an opinion and what is being that someone fucked with your mind. Maybe it's my opinion that I want something, and then maybe Putin also likes to play Candy Crush and I like to play Candy Crush, but it's still not Putin who made me play Candy Crush. It's they fuck with your mind that you can't have an opinion if it's not really far away from Putin. Otherwise you're his best friend. That's so fucked up.
Yeah, it is. It is so bad at this point. If you know what, I really hope that Vladimir Putin just uses this opportunity to go in front of the camera and just say, "Dear friends in the West, 2 + 2 is 4." And by that statement, he could destroy our entire mathematical modeling, because it wouldn't be okay anymore to have that conclusion, right? It would be immediately, you would be a Putin apologist if you came to the number 4. I really hope he will do that, or Lavrov. But your example is beautiful with Sweden meddling in Swiss affairs, because there's one more irony that I remember that referendum, and I voted in it, and I voted against buying the Gripen, and I now regret that so much, because we said no back then. We are now buying F-35s. We should have at least bought the Swedish Gripen. I said no to that because I was against war materials, and now I regret that, because now we're getting the worst ones. I mean, we get the ones that come with a lot of Americans in the backpack. Actually, I would have rather have the Swedes, but all right.
That's the sad part of it too, that even if you you made your statement by then, but then the politics takes you the wrong direction anyways. So that's sad.
It is. But about Sweden, one more question on my mind is, when that happened, that Sweden and Finland said we're going to join NATO, there was this moment when these two female prime ministers, hand in hand, said, we're going hand in hand into NATO. And then basically the second or 2 seconds after Turkey said, well, we're fine with Finland, but not with Sweden, Finland said, bye. And they went first, right? So is there now a sense of betrayal in Sweden? And did that change a bit also the whole idea? I mean, Sweden could just take its application back. That's still in the books. Theoretically,
would be the most reasonable thing to do, especially after Finland joined and we are being surrounded by NATO countries. So what is is there even a risk for Sweden being outside of NATO? But I think the political will in the government is so strong to join NATO. It's been a dream for decades almost, at least for a few of them. So they tried to not talk about it. We're not talking about the Finland letting our hand go issue at all here, because it's so sensitive. And instead, last week we had this meeting, the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, that we actually were part of during spring 2022, but then no one talked about that. That's a few democratic countries having a military alliance in the north of Sweden. That could be plan B now, some journalist says. But it was a plan B even last year. Why should we even join NATO when we have another alliance? That we didn't talk about either. But another interesting thing, I think, as a result of all this, we had 2 female leaders taking hands, taking the countries, trying to take the countries into NATO. And what now? Now we have two really conservative men taking their place. So when we had our first female prime minister in Sweden, she celebrated that by joining NATO and doing being so I think they she was tricked into it. That's my guess and my gut feeling that she didn't want this. She's not. She didn't know anything about the issue when she started, and then she was convinced that this is the only solution. She tried her best in the beginning to argue against it, and then she realized, no, it's too hard. I just give in. So I'm really disappointed. I wish it would have been. I wish for another history in our books that the first female prime minister, she dared the patriarchy and she said, no, thanks. We're gonna do it our way. But we won't have that now, unfortunately.
No, that is again, ironies. The question though still on my mind is if this continues, this blocking by Turkey, if this might lead to a change of mind, if that is even relevant, because I mean we know that Sweden is very integrated into NATO already, because the ground has been prepared with interoperability and so on and so forth, and also luckily Sweden and Russia, Finland and Russia don't have open border disputes. On the other hand, it is really strange to me that Sweden decided to basically declare itself a front state. I mean, Finland even more so. But if there's a war between Russia and NATO, Finland and Sweden are both. I mean, there's a big fat a bullseye on Stockholm and on Helsinki now. It's like you make yourself a target. Is that being reflected at all? Whereas under a neutral foreign policy, this served, especially during the Cold War, Sweden and Finland very well.
No, it's not being debated at all. But as I said in the beginning, the debate is non-existing almost. It's really the colleagues of mine, in other areas, scientists, whatever, who are trying to argue for this broader, more nuanced debate, it's so tough. Some of them are getting almost threatened to lose their jobs because they have the wrong opinion. But as I like to have hope, I feel that at the moment it's during the invasion, from the invasion and so on, they asked the Swedish people every week what we thought about NATO, and then they finally managed to push us over 50% of opinion just when Sweden applied. And then they stopped asking us. They asked us once or twice, and then it was around 60%. But it's still in this really crazy debate when you don't get both sides of it, I would say. If we got the arguments against, we should pause it at least. We should, even if we don't remove the application, we could at least say we're not interested as long as Turkey is acting like they are. I think the support of the Swedish people could grow really quickly if those opinions got to reach open air and the public ear. So therefore, I think when I started, that was the irony also, when the debate of NATO started in Sweden, I thought, oh my God, we're probably gonna join after I quit, and then it was oh fuck, we're gonna apply before I quit. So it was the sprint I was talking about was they first it was the decision was supposed to be made at end of May, and then it changed it to the mid-May, and I quit the 21st of May. So it was really Sweden applied for a NATO membership, and then I quit, and then I started writing the book, and then when it was going to be printed, I was oh, Sweden is still not in NATO. I could never have imagined that I would write a book for a year and Sweden still hadn't been let into NATO. So that made me feel nothing is impossible. Things can change. The debate climate can change. The strength of people who have stood through this storm, this shitstorm. Now we're so strong that we can stand forever, and more people will join in this fight for nuances in a way, just fight for democracy. The fear amongst the Swedes is growing that democracy is threatened. And I think that is also a really good sign. Could make people engage more in things that actually affect them on a daily basis. Because NATO is so abstract, I think, for many still. But when it affects you in your personal life, that makes people act.
Yeah. Agnes, those were beautiful last words. Let's just hope that we don't get rid of democracy in the name of democracy, but
Yes.
standing up together and actually working on it. I have a voting bulletin here right now, so let's just keep voting, you know.
Yeah, that's so important.
Agnes Hellström, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for letting me join.